Corporate Governance Platform, a program from the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, is now at your doorstep.
By the way, what is corporate governance and what are its key pillars?
Will there be any conflict of interest if a person combines the roles of a chairman and a chief executive officer in a corporate organization?
What can Nigeria do to gain international recognition in the context of the application of corporate governance?
These and many more questions will be answered on
Corporate Governance Platform, a program designed to inform and educate our numerous viewers on the adoption of corporate governance best practices by corporate entities.
Join the Corporate Governance Platform crew every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. on MITV, your talent station, via DSTV 255 and UHF 43.
Corporate Governance Platform, your strategy for the adoption of corporate governance best practices by corporate entities. Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, the hub of governance professionals.
Good evening and welcome to Corporate Governance Platform, proudly brought to you by the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria. I am your regular host, Tunde Odeyemi, and in today's episode, we are going to take a look at the importance of corporate governance to the nation's economic development. And to lead in this conversation is a distinguished fellow of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, Mrs. UKPANAH. Mrs. UKPANAH is the company secretary of MTN Nigerian Communications PLC. She is also responsible for operational governance of MTN Foundation Limited by guarantee, as well as other entities within the Nigerian structure. She coordinated the team that facilitated the successful listing of MTN Nigeria on the premium board of the Nigerian Stock Exchange, the first by any company. Prior to joining MTN, Mrs. UKPANAH was the Assistant Company Secretary of United Bank for Africa PLC. A legal practitioner with over 30 years of professional experience, Mrs. UKPANAH is actively involved in the development of corporate governance codes and ethics related guidelines across sectors in Nigeria and globally. She is a certified ethics officer of the Ethics Institute and University of Stellenbosch, South Africa. Other professional memberships include the Nigerian Bar Association, International Bar Association, as well as the Ethics and Compliance Officers Association, United States of America. Mrs. UKPANAH has been supporting the activities of ICSAN for over 20 years, long before she became a member, particularly through securing corporate sponsorship, serving as a resource person, as well as securing resource persons for the Institute activities. Mrs. UKPANAH, you are welcome to a Corporate Governance Platform.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for obliging to our invitation.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And for all that you do for the Institute, we say thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's go straight to the point. Today we want to discuss corporate governance and the nation's economy. And I would like to start by asking, the normal way that I start with every of my guests that comes around here is what is meant by corporate governance?
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you for having me here. It's indeed a delight to be here.
You are welcome.
Corporate governance generally talks about the processes, the policies, all the frameworks in place to guide how a company is managed and controlled. You're aware that directors have fiduciary responsibilities towards an entity, and to enable them exercise this role, you need to put in place a system, a process, guidance around these things.
Okay.
And so corporate governance extends to all that you do to encourage proper corporate behavior.
Wow. Okay, what then does economic development connote?
Economic development also looks at how do you create wealth for a community, for a nation. What are those things that you can deliberately do? What are the deliberate efforts to make sure that you foster economic prosperity of that nation, of that community, of those who are within? What do you do to ensure that you move from a low income, okay, or what is generally termed as a developing economy, and transit to a high income, and of course what is more generally known as a developed economy. How do you transition? So economic development is all those deliberate investments that you make to ensure that you transit from a low income developing nation to a high income and more sophisticated developed economy.
Then what then is the nexus between corporate governance on one hand and economic development on the other hand?
Well, definitely when you have a climate, an environment where good corporate governance exists, it builds investor confidence and trust. And so this is very critical. It also promotes behavior that ensures that ensures that everyone, policies are developed that encourage accountability, transparency. And so where you have an environment where, if you look at let's look at the developed nations.
Okay.
You will find that the corporates there are very high standards of corporate governance that are demanded, whether it's diversity, whether it's accountability, transparency in everything that those corporates do. And even in terms of the policies that promote that environment, all these are designed so that you will drive investors. You will ensure that when investors come to your environment, they feel secure.
Okay.
They feel that the investments are safe. And so there is that connection that where you find high standards of corporate governance, certainly the prosperity of that nation, the prosperity of that community, the prosperity of that environment will definitely be stable, and also drives the public, whether from the private sector or from the public sector, there's a cohesive effort to ensure that that environment reflects the sort of economic prosperity that they wish to see.
Okay, interesting. Let me ask a very funny but logical question. Is it because these nations are developed, that is why they have high standard of corporate governance, or is it because they have high standard of corporate governance that make them to be developed nations?
Very interesting question, and thank you for that. As we said, there's a connection.
Okay.
And corporate governance is also evolves. So
right.
you'll find that when we look at environments like, let's take the US for example.
Okay.
If you think back at the 1930s, where there was the Wall Street crash and of course the Great Depression, you will find that this led to post that era. You find that there was a strengthening of corporate governance, because one thing about you want in an environment where there's good corporate governance and where the economic prosperity of the people is also evolving. You find that they go hand in hand together. Yes. Okay. So good economic policies also lead to good corporate governance as well. And so it's a mutually rewarding relationship. So
okay, let's look at these statements. If you don't have good governance in your client, investment will flow elsewhere, is a statement. Can you explain the import of this statement in the context of national economic development?
Definitely. I mean, when you look at, again, if we look at developing nations and developed nations, because investors are certain that if I take my investment here, or if I decide to go in this environment, because of the good corporate governance that I will find, I will be sure that my investment is secure. And if you are in an environment where, let's say, for instance, corruption is endemic, you will find that rather than investments flowing in your direction, they will flow elsewhere. Also, I mean, you would have followed the public discourse that, there are some who are positively inclined. There are some who are not so aligned with the decision. If you look at the decision of Twitter, for instance, to go and cite its sub-Saharan African operations in Ghana, there's been a lot of a lot of furor has been generated by that decision.
Sure.
But that is just to demonstrate how investors will look and assess your environment before they take decisions that could either enrich your environment and help you transit along that journey from a developed economy to a developing economy. So it is very important that we are very deliberate about the steps that we take in terms of economic development.
Look, what you're saying is that the statement is valid.
Absolutely.
To all intent and purposes.
It is
It's valid. Okay. Can you give 2 examples of corporate failures and ascribe governance principles that were infringed upon that led to that failure?
Let me start with an example that is widely known, an example that really brought corporate governance to the center stage, and that is Enron. When you look at the Enron scenario, interestingly, there's a book and which was also made into a movie called The Smartest Guys in the Room. And this focused on the role of the Enron CEO, the Enron board generally, the CFO, the chairman of Enron, and their roles. And you see that because of poor corporate governance standards and application, Enron, that was a global brand, was brought down, and which means that there is no company too big to fail. And not only did Enron fail, Arthur Andersen, I mean, when I was entering the labor market, Arthur Andersen was the employer of choice. And Arthur Andersen, that had been in existence for almost 90 years.
Wow.
And was one of the big 5 consulting firms, when you think of the KPMGs, the Deloitte.
Globally, right?
Globally, yes, precisely. And it brought down that firm because they were also implicated in shredding and falsifying accounting information. Now, one of the things that came up in terms of the corporate governance was that the audit committee of Enron should have interrogated the accounting, the information that was provided for them, and that they didn't do this. Otherwise, they would have seen that information was falsified, and this underscores the importance of having good corporate governance structures in place, including the audit committee. If we come home locally, you would say, look at, for instance, the financial services sector. You'll see that some of the banks that were here in 1990 are no more.
Okay.
And so the financial services sector also went through a process where they grappled with various corporate governance issues, from not being transparent, lack of accountability, lack of board cohesion, and you've seen that this has also resulted in the Central Bank of Nigeria enhancing the corporate governance rules and exercising its oversight function in a more rigorous way.
Okay, that's splendid. What are the specific benefits to be derived for adhering to governance principles on board composition and structure?
Thank you very much for that question. As you're aware, the board is the principal governance organ in any company, and it is there at the behest of the shareholders because they give them the mandate and the authority to act on their behalf. And so the board has a very crucial role to play in driving good corporate governance and championing and promoting corporate governance practices. The board structure, the various codes recommend that you have a diverse and diversity in terms of experience, in terms of knowledge base, in terms of gender. Diversity. And what this means is that, for instance, if you're a financial services in the financial services sector, you should have board members who have demonstrable knowledge in that sector. But you should not populate it totally because there are activities of the bank that require the knowledge of lawyers. There's some that require the knowledge of other people with extensive, depending on the area of focus of the company. And the same with, assuming a telecoms company, for instance, you must have people who have demonstrable knowledge in the telecom sector, and of course diversity in gender, knowledge and experience. And all these ensure that your decision-making process is seamless, it's credible, because also the kind of people you have on your board speaks a lot about the quality of decisions that company takes, and also engenders and fosters investor and stakeholder trusts.
Wonderful. So diversity is of utmost importance in board composition.
Yes.
Okay, we will go on a very short break. When we come back, we continue the discussion on corporate governance and the nation's economic development. Please stay with us.
Corporate Governance Platform, a program from the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, is now at your doorstep.
By the way, what is corporate governance and what are its key pillars?
Will there be any conflict of interest if a person combines the roles of a chairman and a chief executive officer in a corporate organization?
What can Nigeria do to gain international recognition in the context of the application of corporate governance?
These and many more questions will be answered on
Corporate Governance Platform, a program designed to inform and educate our numerous viewers on the adoption of corporate governance best practices by corporate entities.
Join the Corporate Governance Platform crew every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. on MITV, your talent station, via DSTV 255 and UHF 43.
Corporate Governance Platform, your strategy for the adoption of corporate governance best practices by corporate entities. Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, the hub of governance professionals.
You're welcome back. It's the Corporate Governance Platform, proudly brought to you by ICSAN, and we are discussing corporate governance and the nation's economy. And I still have here with me in the studio Mrs. UKPANAH. I would like to go into questions that relate to the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance. You said before the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance of 2018, there were some sectoral codes, different sectors. How effective would you say these codes were?
Thank you very much for that question. First, let me just go back and say that unlike a lot of jurisdictions, that corporate governance in Nigeria actually evolved through the sectors. Okay. And one must commend the sectoral regulators for being proactive and in putting in place codes that specifically looked at their sectors. Okay. So you will find that between 2000 and, in fact, the Central Bank of Nigeria has been earlier. It has been quite early in the play. But if you wind back to 2003 and look at the SEX initiative in terms of the Code of Corporate Governance for Public Companies, okay, popularly known as the Peterside Code, that also really brought the conversation to the fore. And between 2006 to 2011, you will find that various sectors, from the pensions to insurance to the central bank again, had the 2014 code, which replaced its earlier post-consolidation code. And all these, what the sectoral regulators have tried to do is to ensure that they look at this uniqueness of their sectors, okay, and make sure that they have defined those processes and those policies that would foster good corporate governance, and also ensure that it minimizes the incidence of corporate failure within their sector. The CBN, the SEC Code of Corporate Governance for Public Companies in 2011 also ramped up those efforts. And you will find that one of the things that was mentioned there, was introduced, was that companies should recognize corruption as a major risk to business, and should make every effort to enshrine zero tolerance for corruption. That took into cognizance the fact that we live in an environment, you operate in an environment where corruption shows up in major global indexes. So,
Wow.
for instance, if you look at the Transparency International index on corruption, you find that sub-Saharan Africa is always at the bottom. So these codes have over time helped companies within their sectors to pay greater attention than they did before to corporate governance issues. Also, of course, the telecom sector also came into much later, but all the sectoral regulators have attempted to do and have strived to do is to make sure that corporate governance plays a leading role in corporate existence and activities.
Okay, talking about sectors, one of the sectoral codes was the Nigerian Communication Commission Code for Communication Industry, which was released in 2014. How effective and helpful would you say that this code has been to the telecommunication sector?
Thank you very much. If you look at the telecom sector, you could say it's the baby sector,
Okay.
because while you have all the other sectors that have existed prior to 2001, telecoms only was birthed around 2001, and so the Nigerian Communications Commission also saw that because these companies had grown into companies that touch the lives of literally every Nigerian or a significant number of Nigerians. For instance, you have more telecom subscribers than than those who hold bank accounts, and so it was important that they also ensure that the companies within their sector adhere to globally accepted principles. Now, what the code did, and just to mention that the 2014 code was subsequently replaced by a code that came into being in 2016. What it did was to adopt provisions in the Companies and Allied Matters Act, and of course the Nigerian Communications Act, and of course best practice principles that already exist in the sphere of corporate governance. Now, what it has done is that if you look at the telecom space, you see there are major players, and it would be unimaginable if any of these companies were to fail. Most of us would be in dire straits because we wake up with our phones, we literally have everything on our phones. So it is important that these companies continue to be going concerns, and this is what good governance does. It helps businesses to be sustainable.
Okay, away from the telecoms and the other sector, I want to get back to Nigeria as a nation. And I want to ask these 2-in-1 questions. I want to be very brief in the answers to them. Now, how would you assess the state of adherence to corporate governance in Nigeria on one hand? And will you say Nigeria has gained anything in terms of economic benefits since the advent of the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance 2018?
Thank you. So I'll try to be brief in my response to the two questions as well. Corporate governance is continuing to evolve. If you look at where we were in terms of corporate governance adherence in 2003 and where we are today, if I can give you a simple example, when you get the notice of AGM, you find now that companies will explain their resolutions. They provide explanatory notes. Companies didn't do that in 2003. So you find that investors are now allowed the opportunity, minority shareholders are given the opportunity to ask questions, and they are responded to. There's more information, there's greater transparency. So yes, indeed, there have been benefits, and the journey continues. The current environment encourages such that corporate governance is not a tick box. It must be lived in the spirit. And the nation has benefited because where you have a vibrant community, a private sector, public regulators also be championing good governance as well, then definitely economic prosperity goes on the positive trend.
Wonderful. And in 1 minute, your final word of advice to companies that are practicing corporate governance and the regulators of corporate governance?
I believe both are stakeholders in the corporate governance arena, and they must work hand in hand. It is not enough to approach corporate governance from a punitive and sanction-based approach. Rather, it must be collaborative, because essentially it's a journey that they must work together. No regulator wants to regulate a sector that is not prosperous and successful, and the same swings the other way. So I believe that they must be partners in this journey. They must support each other. There must be extensive engagement both ways.
Thank you very much, Mrs. UKPANAH. This is where we'll wrap it up on today's edition. Our final words is that the regulators and the operators are both stakeholders, and they must work together to ensure there is high standard of corporate governance. Thank you very much for being with us on this particular episode of Corporate Governance Platform. We invite you to join us again next week, same station, same time. I remain your anchorman, Tunde Odeyemi. Bye for now.
Corporate Governance Platform, a program from the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, is now at your doorstep.
By the way, what is corporate governance and what are its key pillars?
Will there be any conflict of interest if a person combines the roles of a chairman and a chief executive officer in a corporate organization?
What can Nigeria do to gain international recognition in the context of the application of corporate governance?
These and many more questions will be answered on
Corporate Governance Platform, a program designed to inform and educate our numerous viewers on the adoption of corporate governance best practices by corporate entities.
Join the Corporate Governance Platform crew every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. on MITV, your talent station via DSTV 255 and UHF 43.
Corporate Governance Platform, your strategy for the adoption of corporate governance best practices